Just getting arranged up here. Sorry. Too tall for a stage. Right. And of course, the modern notebook. Out of curiosity, who's been reading Ruth as we're going through this in your own time? There's a few. That's interesting. I think you're missing out, honestly. Those people who are not reading Ruth, it is actually one of my favourite books of all time. As I've studied it over the past 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is, 3 months? 4 months, something like that. I've come to appreciate the beauty in the book. And in fact, if you look at it as a particular piece of literature, it's absolutely exquisite. It's a narrative, it's a story, and I really do recommend that you read it. You do miss it a little bit because of the translation and culture and times and things like that, but actually it's of great benefit, and I hope you see that today in this particular message. Well, one of the challenges that I face with the book of Ruth is that it is in fact a story. You might say, well, that's a bit strange, it's a story. Well, when you are breaking apart a piece of the Bible, you want to present it. And the first temptation is to go to our Western mind. In our Western mind, we're very analytical. We break things apart. We put them into little pieces, and we're looking for that logic. We're looking for that other sort. And my job is like that as well, right? Like I'm a solutions architect for an IT firm, right? So this is what I do. So that's my go-to. But actually, you can't do that because there are 3 different types of literature. If you want to understand them, you need to appreciate them and approach them first in the way that the author intended you to do it, right? So if it is discourse, which is the type which we would normally have in the Western world, which we like to beat every other sort of literature to death with, then what you would do is you follow the logical arguments, you build it, you understand the framework, the reasoning and so forth behind it. But what you'll find is that discourse in the Bible, if you go through and you map out every chapter in the Bible, okay, I haven't done this, somebody else has done this, I just using his research, basically, and classify each chapter by the majority of what it is in that chapter, you find that 24% of the Bible, not even quarter of the Bible, is this logical discourse reasoning sort of stuff. And horror of horrors, poetry is 33% of the Bible, measured this way. And poetry, how do you approach poetry? I mean, I've used poetry as Psalm 22 in a previous message, right? And you actually have to approach it in a completely different way, because poetry is all about the metaphor, it's all about the feeling, the emotion, the texture, and it's about moving somebody from one place to another place. It's about moving the heart. Where discourse is all about your head, poetry is all about your heart. And in the Western culture, we really don't do that very well at all. In the Eastern culture, they have a whole lot better, but today we're going to see a little bit of poetry. Well, actually we're not going to see that particular piece of poetry. I'll reference it. But it's important to understand what that literature is there for. So when we look at the narrative, okay, it's a story. You read a story, you have a good time, you close the book, you put it back on the shelf, you send it back to the library. If you like the Dead Tree edition, or if you've got your Kindle, you just go on to the next one of the 900 books that you've downloaded and you've never actually read. So today's story is a narrative. It's a story, but more importantly, it's a beautiful story that's part of God's story, right? He's given us this awesome book, the Bible, and it's a story that he sees you and I in. Isn't that awesome? Like, God has this story, this book, and he sees you and I in that, right? He's got a place for you and me. And that's the essence of what the narrative is, that you read a narrative either to escape the real world or see your place in it. And sometimes you do both. You escape and see your place in it. And what's even better is that he wants to see us in it, but he wants us to see ourselves in it as well. And that's why he's given us the narrative. So what we're going to do today is we're going to read the story, like a story. Kind kind of like a story. It's me. I'm going to add in a few bits and pieces here and there. And then we're going to think about how God's people first looked at the story, how they considered it and put it in their lives. And then we're going to look at how the themes flow into our lives as well. So let's step into it. Firstly, in chapter 1, Ruth turns from her life in Moab and she embraces the culture and the people of Israel and the covenant for Naomi. Naomi and her family have moved down into Moab because of a disaster, and when they get into Moab, disaster is sort of like in the back of the minds for a while, and then tragedy strikes, and then you've got these two women who are left alone there, Ruth and Naomi. And Ruth commits to Naomi. She embraces the culture, the people, and the God of Israel, and the covenant with Naomi. I think that one of the things which we need to understand here is what a covenant actually is. So I'll just go into that in a little bit. A covenant is a personal, spiritual, and lifelong commitment to a way of living together. Right? People get together in a covenant. This is how we go forwards from here. Each person who partakes in this covenant actually offers themselves as part of that covenant. It's a little bit different from a contract, which you see people today. People think marriage is a contract. Marriage is not a contract. Marriage is a covenant, right? You put yourself into it. People put their assets into a contract, but they don't ever put themselves into it. Each person is accountable not to a justice system, but to God. It is lifelong. It is not signed. It is sealed. Marriage is probably the best illustration that we have, or in the modern world. And each person in the covenant is responsible for helping the other person keep it as well. In a contract, if it falls apart, you just walk your separate ways. But a covenant is not like that. And this is God's picture for marriage as well. Ruth's covenant is a bit different, though. It's, normally there's like terms and other bits and pieces. This is how we do life together. When you read Ruth's covenant, which is actually done in poetry, right, in the end of chapter 1, you find that she's explaining where she is as a person. This is not head knowledge. She has moved that space. And Naomi sees this and she respects this. And so together they walk back to Bethlehem. But this covenant is very one-sided. She offers herself in it, but Naomi is really just the benefactor, and she doesn't have to do much of anything other than just agree to it. Then we move into chapter 2, and we had a brilliant message last week from Rebecca. And she explained this term. I was actually thinking, how on earth am I going to get to the depth of this term in here? I'd love to, but the reality was I don't have that much time, and she did such a great job. So if you didn't see Rebecca's message last week, go back, have a look at it. It's really cool. So in chapter 2, Ruth and Naomi have returned from Moab and they've settled in Bethlehem, which is Naomi's hometown. And we see Ruth living out her covenant for Naomi. Now in Hebrew, the word for somebody who lives out their life covenant is hesed. Now I'm going to apologize because I'm not actually pronouncing it correctly. And if I did pronounce it correctly, the front 3 rows should actually be wearing rain jackets, right? Because it's just like, it's got that sort of like back of the throat sort of, I want to... But the reality is, this is what this word is meant for. Like he has said, as Rebecca said last week, it's an untranslatable Hebrew word, one-to-one. There is no other language that I know of that has an equivalent in any language. It binds 3 precious concepts together. Firstly, there's the steadfast faithfulness to that covenant or relationship. Secondly, there's an overwhelming generosity, often demonstrated by mercy or grace. And in fact, what happens when you read the Bible, you look at it like Micah 6:8, for example, it's a very famous verse, right? What is required of you, O man? To do justly, that's cool. Justice has got a one-to-one in it. To love mercy, actually it's to love hesed. What the authors do is they translate the word and what they think is the best outcome of that particular relationship, what that hesed actually is. But the word is hesed, it's to love hesed, to love this relationship, this foundation. So that's the second thing, was overwhelming generosity. And the last, of course, is amazing, abounding love, one for another within that unity. So when you think about it in the New Testament, where the Lord says to us through his writers, he says, look, the people out there, the world out there, are going to know you because you love one another. That's part of this whole thing. And in chapter 2, we see that Ruth exercises her hesed, her lifelong commitment, her way of living together with Naomi, by supporting Naomi, by going out into the fields and gleaning. Boaz in chapter 2 also shows his hesed. I'm not going to go back to his particular foundational covenant, but there's one there, you can ask me later on, to Ruth by giving her a special place in his fields and giving special instructions and protecting her. And in doing so, they're both displaying their hesed, which has been based on doing right in God's plan, because this is an essential character of God. Hesed is an essential character of God. And that's what happened in Ruth chapter 2. So she works in the fields for several weeks, and then we step into Ruth chapter 3. And this, I just love this chapter. It's so cool. It really is so cool. Now, we step into today's part of the story. Several weeks have gone by. Ruth and Boaz's relationship has progressed, and we're going to see that. There's some hints in the text which I should tell you about that as well. It's getting on towards the end of the harvest, and sharp as a tack, Naomi's been reading the signs. And she's got an audacious and risky plan. Now, when you first read this chapter, because we're separated from that culture, you don't understand just how risky and audacious this plan really is, but we'll get into it. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I seek a resting place for you so that things might go well for you?" Now, the thing that you're not seeing here, the resting place is actually it's not like a rest stop on the way. Right, I'm going to catch my breath. Now I can go on, catch my breath, etc. This is a place of rest. This is a home. I resist calling it a rest home, but it is actually a place where you can sit and you can flourish and you can live out that way of living together with those people that you have agreed. This doesn't sound like marriage, right? And what this is, which is exactly where we're going with this, but yeah, it's a special word there. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about rest. Naomi goes on, "Remember Boaz, whose girls you are with, is one of our relatives." There's a clue in this sentence, is one of our relatives. Now, Boaz is known as a redeemer, and we'll get into the redeemer part of it in a little while, but he's not actually like the first in line, as it were. He's one of the redeemers that could potentially get us out of the bit of strife that we're actually in. And because they are poor, they're trying to, they need that security, and she needs that resting place. Tonight, he is winnowing grain on the threshing floor. Bathe, put on some perfume, wear nice clothes, and go down to a dirty, dank place which is full of guys throwing rubbish in the air. Right? It's like, this is what's going on here. Well, what she's telling her to do, and what you can't see here without Jewish eyes, is that actually she's given her the instructions. I want you to dress up like a bride for marriage. This is what, and so this is getting a little bit risky, all right? So let's move it on a little bit, and I'll summarize this piece in a second. Don't make yourself known unto the man until he's finished eating. What? Don't make yourself known to the man? You're going to send this girl to one of the dudes who is one of the main guys in the town. You're going to get her to dress up as a bride, and he doesn't know she's coming. Can you think of the risk involved here? Not only that, she is probably, in fact, in chapter 2, she's painfully aware that she is a Moabitess and she is not worthy and she is not part of that community. And she's going to go to the head guy, one of the head guys around the place. The risk and the guts to pull this off, I think sometimes by just the simple reading of it, you don't, in the English, you don't quite get it. Ruth is being asked something really serious here. don't make yourself known unto the man until he's finished eating and drinking. It's a time of harvest. It's a festival. There's everybody down there. Like anybody who's anybody is down today at there. They're all eating, they're all drinking, they're having a great time. And when he lies down, notice the place where he's lying, because it's going to be dark, and really you don't want to be lying, you don't want to approach the wrong guy, right? We're already at a risk here. Let's not go there. Just be careful, Then go, uncover his legs, lie down, and he's going to tell you what to do. That sounds a bit weird, but okay, we'll roll with it. So what we see here is Ruth responding. She says, look, I'm going to go and do everything you tell me to do. Could you imagine the trust needed for that? Can you imagine stepping out in that trust, in that faith, and going like, I'm going to go carry it? It's very clear what's going on here from their perspective. She is going to have a quiet conversation with this man about their relationship and taking it to the next level, as people would say today. So what does the threshing floor actually look like? Well, here's the threshing floor, and sorry, Alex, I am going to walk off screen for a minute. This is actually a picture taken in 1890 in that particular region, and this is what it looked like. Now, this isn't during festival times, so this is just your normal, everyday, this is who's down there. So you can see there's crowds of people around, big piles of the harvested plant material. This guy over here, you can't see it, but he's actually pulling along a threshing sledge, and that's a big piece of wood. Sometimes they get kids to stand on them, and they drag them over to cut up the plant material so they could get at the grain more easily. There's a second method here. There's a little white donkey here. I'm just sorry if I'm in everyone's way. There's a little white donkey here, and he's actually treading down the grain, right? Treading down the plant material, because of course it's all fluffy, so then that can go over there. That's another way. And then these ladies over here, I'm going to assume or presume, I've done a wee bit of research, they're beating the grain directly out of the heads of the material, and that is actually the most labour-intensive way of doing things. That's really hard work. So this is what they're doing. They're preparing the wheat that they've harvested so that they can separate the plant material that they don't need into a couple of piles, one for burning for fuel, another one for animal feed, and then, of course, they do this to it. And this is so Boaz has just spent all day tossing plant material in the air, getting absolutely covered in it. And these three chaps, and doing exactly that. You can't really see it, but you can kind of see where the loose plant material is actually being blown in front of them, in front of the guy in the darker outfit. And basically they've stayed in there all that day. So Boaz has been doing this all day long. Well, actually, it's more in the evening when the wind is just right for it, because you do need wind for this. And then he's feasted. They've had a big festival. He's gone to find a nice, quiet place. Let's read on. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything just as her mother-in-law had ordered. Boaz ate and he drank and he was in a good mood, and he went over to lie down by the edge of the grain pile. It actually looks quite comfortable, but in my mind I'm thinking it'd be really scratchy as well. And then she quietly approached him, uncovered his legs and lay down beside him. And in the middle of the night, the man was startled and recoiled from the woman lying next to him. Just think about it for a moment here, right? So you're in the middle of a festival, so you found it, and you've had your fill, and you really can't walk home tonight. You don't want a DRC on your donkey, and so you find a nice quiet spot where you can just snooze for a while, catch a few Zs, and you wake up in the middle of the night and it's dark, right? You can't see much at all until you step out and into the moonlight. It's like, what's going on here? He recoiled from the woman next. It's a jump scare, basically. And he said, "Who are you?" I think that'd be my first question. I mean, there are lots of people all over the place here. Don't get me wrong, but he said, "Who are you?" She replies, "I'm Ruth, your maidservant. Spread out your robe over your servant, because you are a redeemer." And I'm going to unpack this for you a little bit, because there's a lot which is said right in those three things. Ruth's response is courageous. Basically, she's all in, right? She's listened to Naomi. The two have got this plan together. It's awesome, and she's trusting, and she's stepping out in faith that this is going to work. and that God's got her. She replied, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Now, in chapter 2, what you find is a really interesting scene, the very first scene with Boaz, right? So Boaz actually, and the narrator says, he just happened to come into the field when Ruth just happened to be there, right? So this is one of those providence coincidence type stories. And he sees her in the field, and the words he uses, he wants to have a word with her, so he says, draw near. Now, you're supposed to understand from the draw near a little bit more. Everywhere else, you'll see him use that word draw near. He'll say, like, draw near, come sit over here. In fact, next week, when Hayden's talking, he does this. He uses exactly the same words. He says, draw near and sit here to another person. But this is draw near to me. And the idea of the context is I want to have an intimate conversation with you. I want to have a personal conversation with you. Because he knows all about her. And you find that in that... in that particular section, in that particular passage. But what's really important in that passage is Ruth uses that maidservant term there. She says, I am not, why are you talking to me? I'm not even vaguely worth being one of your maidservants. And a maidservant was a member of the household, the lowest member of the household, okay? Not necessarily family, but the lowest member of the household. But I'm not even, I can't, because I'm a Moabitess. She knows, she understands. Remember when I said their relationships moved on? It's moved on. There is a relationship now where she can come to Boaz and say, hey, look, I'm Ruth. I am your maidservant. She is now connected here somehow as part of the household. Spread out your robe and over your servant. There's two parts to this one. The first bit is to spread out your robe. Boaz wakes up, he sees a woman next to him who's Ruth, who's been keeping an eye on, by the way, right? And she is dressed up as a what? A bride, right? And she says, spread out your robe and cover me, right, over your servant. In the Jewish ceremony for weddings, the bride and the groom are covered at one point to represent their spiritual intimacy going forwards as one person. It's part of the covenant relationship. And Boaz would not have missed this at all. But there's a problem. There is a problem. And that's where we go back to, he is a redeemer. Spread out your robe over your servant because you are a redeemer. Now, it says spread out your robe over your servant. She's just demoted herself to servant. Servant is actually property. And a redeemer in those days could go and buy back lost property. So if I was to lose some property and I was unable to restore it, my brother could come along as a redeemer and buy it back for me. Right? So it would be restoring the family name and everything. Notice also that it costs something for the redeemer, and he's restoring somebody else's fortune. Sound familiar? Spread out your robe over your servant. She's calling herself property, right? And this is, you've heard of house and land deals? Well, this is a wife and land deal, right? This is you get the whole package. When you go in and you redeem the lost property, you redeem it all. The land, the wife, the donkey that was lost last year, whatever it was, right? So now we can see what she's actually asking here. So she is asking to be redeemed. But she's also asking Boaz, very subtly, marry me. And Boaz, he's just jumping at the chance. He goes may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have acted more faithfully than you did at first. You haven't gone after rich men or rich or poor young men. Let's break this down a little bit. The word faithfully here, once again, it's hesed. You've acted with more hesed. You have acted more dedicated to me. Now, what has hesed got to do with this particular piece? In Ruth chapter 2, Ruth is doing the essential, right? She is providing for Naomi as she promised she would. What you see in this verse here is he says, you haven't gone after rich or poor young men. She can still be true to her covenant and do other things, but she has chosen this path because it is better Well, number one, she wants Boaz, but it's better because for the covenant, for the hesed, and it's an act of generosity. Remember how the hesed has got those characteristics. This is an illustration of an act of generosity. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do for you everything that you're asking. Indeed, my people, all who are at the gate, know that you are a woman of worth. This is pretty cool. Now, notice how Boaz, he says, you haven't gone after rich or poor men. In the Hebrew, he knows that she's had opportunities to go after rich or poor men, right? It doesn't say you sought after, but you followed after, and it implies that she's had those opportunities. But it also means, if you think about it, right? So he knows about her from the beginning. He's following her. He's interested in her, and he knows that she's had opportunities. And also, he knows that people are talking about her in the gate. He's really hooked. Now, although it's certainly true that I'm a redeemer, there is a redeemer who's a closer relative than I, and here we are. Stay the night, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, let him redeem you. If he doesn't want to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, he didn't need to say that, but he did, I myself will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. And at that point, Ruth is covered. He has covered her with his words, and his commitment. So she lay at his feet until morning, and then she got up before one person could recognize another. They hadn't turned the lights on yet. For he said, no one should know that the woman came to the threshing floor. This is a risky business, right? He's got to sort this thing out with the number one in the pecking order line for redemption. He said, bring the cloak that you have on, hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and placed it upon her, and then she went into town. She came to her mother-in-law and said, how are you, my daughter? So Ruth told her everything that the man had done for her, and she said, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, because he said to me, don't go away empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Wait, my daughter, Naomi replied, until you know how it turns out. The man will not rest until he resolves the matter today. And that's chapter 3. That's the end of the story for today. Storyteller number 4 will be here next week, Hayden, which I am very looking forward to. So, and that's our story. So what I want to do now is I want to have a look at how the people of Israel actually connected with this story. And then we'll look at how we can connect with the story as well, and how we are connected with the story, which is really important. Of course, when we talk about how the children of Israel, the people of Israel, see this story, there's many people and there's many views, but in my studies it basically boils down to a few things. At the simplest level, the story of Ruth takes place at the time of great feasting. It was the second of 3 main feasts ordained by God in Exodus 23. You can look it up later, it's very cool. And Ruth fits in that with that perfectly. It was great illustrative work. Also, Ruth's covenant in chapter 1 shows us that she adopted the Jewish teaching known as the Torah. Notice that it's a teaching, it's not the law. Some people call it the law, but it's actually the teachings. Known as the Torah and culture as her own. And in becoming part of Israel, she also participated in the covenant that Israel entered with God at Mount Sinai. Okay? But at the deepest level, and more significant, I think, there is a recognition not just of Ruth's turning to faith in the God of Israel, but her hesed based on that covenant. The book of Ruth is about courageously living out a covenant in love, how we do life together. So it should be no surprise then that the Torah, with its covenant, is read on the first day of this particular festival, when tradition actually holds that it was given. There's no concrete evidence to support that other than just tradition, which is at the moment. And then Ruth is read on the second day, showing by example how to live out a covenant. Ruth is all about hesed. In the first chapter of Ruth, you see her turning from that space, from her home, to embrace the Jewish people and culture and God. And then the second one, you see her acting justly. The third one, you see her loving mercy. And the fourth one, you actually see Boaz and Ruth walking humbly with their God. They're not actually pushing the issue. They are working through very closely. Sometimes we get to the point, you get to the end of the threshing floor saying, let's just do this, right? Okay? But they actually wait on God's providence and they work it out rightly. And in a nutshell, the Jewish people recognized Ruth and had a similar journey that they had taken. They share the same story and they rightly claim her as their own. So they celebrate her and his story as their own. So let's see how we should see ourselves. Oh, by the way, it's called Shavuot is the feast. And they have really good cheesecake too. Some awesome cheesecake recipes. Never mind. So how are we connected? Well, similarly, our story starts with a covenant. Our story starts with the cross of Christ. Our story starts where with that wonderful covenant, it's horribly one-sided again. Have you noticed that? Ruth, one-sided covenant. This is a one-sided covenant. Jesus pays for us all to give us rest, and to give us that permanent home. There's nothing that can separate us from it. There's nothing that we can do to mess it up, like in the original covenant. And in fact, let's have a look at that for a moment. Let's have a look at what Jesus said to start with, just to give us the temperature of this particular covenant. Now, while they were eating, Jesus took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave to the disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Have you ever sat down at a table and somebody hands you a piece of bread and broken in half and said, "This is my body. Can you mind eating that, please?" It's weird. The disciples should have known that what was happening here. This was an ancient ritual. This was the establishment of a covenant. And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it all. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is being poured out for the many for the victims' forgiveness of sins." Excuse me. Now, blood. Remember, I said that a contract is agreed to; it's signed. A covenant is sealed, and it is a lifelong seal, and it is sealed with blood to show the level at which that they are involved in this covenant. In Jeremiah 31, the Lord talks about how his new covenant replaces the one between God and Israel given at Mount Sinai, the one which Ruth has actually been connected to. And he links those two covenants together. And God recognizes in Jeremiah that the people had failed and he needed to help them. And remember, a good covenant partner helps the other people in the covenant. Let's have a look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant," which we've just read about from Jesus, "not like the covenant that I made with their fathers, that they broke. I will put my law in them, and I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sins no more." There is the promise. This is unbreakable. We can't break out of it. We are safe. He gives us that place of rest. We don't have to be overly worried about that. There are still going to be consequences for our actions, but the ultimate consequences of hell and death have been removed. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15, I like this verse, so I put it in here, because it brings them even closer together, those two covenants. "Therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Since the death has occurred that redeems us from the transgressions committed under the first covenant." The death in the new covenant fulfills the old covenant, right? We are strongly linked to the covenant and to the experience of Ruth. The new covenant fulfills the penalty of the first covenant, but better still, the payment is complete and for all time. And for all those who enter into the new covenant, there is peace and there is rest with God. So we don't have to be worried that we're going to be cast into outer darkness. He's certainly going to work with us when we mess stuff up, and we will mess stuff up. But like Ruth, we have found our place of rest. And our story also continues with hesed. God's hesed doesn't require us, as I have said already, to be worthy of him. When you lie awake at night and you go like, I'm really not worthy. And I know from experience, as a Christian, you just like, if it was up to me, I'd be failing. Like, it's just, and, sometimes it can be a genuine worry for a Christian, for somebody. But, through God's hesed, the fact that he made this one-sided deal, he's like, don't worry about it. I know, I understand, I hear you, I see you, I got you. Rest in my love, rest in my hesed. And we'll work on this, we'll walk this together. When you mess up again, and yeah, I do that all the time, and you sin, and you grieve over your sin. You get to that point where you're grieving, not in the middle of the sin here. You're grieving over your sin. It really does hurt me when I sin. Right? What is my relationship like with the Lord? The Lord's going to go like, yeah, man, I know. This is why I died. This is what I paid for. Don't worry, I got this. Yeah, we're going to be working on it, and then we're going to have some words, right? There are going to be some consequences. But you're not going to be cast out into outer darkness. Rest in my hesed. Have confidence in me that I have provided for you everything that you need. You can mess up, but come back, walk with me. Walk in my hesed. When the world's chaos presses in on you as well. And the world at the moment is in a lot of chaos. I mean, I look around, we've got wars, we've got crazy laws, we've got people saying all sorts of things, right? When it presses in on you so you can't see your way forward, Jesus says, don't worry, I get it, I got this. I walked the earth in the time of the Romans, and they were a pretty miserable bunch. Let me carry you. Rest in my hesed. Rest in my love. Hesed represents a profound, all-encompassing love, kindness and faithfulness that God demonstrates towards his people. But it's also a model for how believers are called to love and treat one another, showing mercy and loyalty, unwavering commitment in their relationships. Remember that, how will they know you? Because you love each other. Hesed is a foundational concept in understanding the character of God and the behavior that God expects of his people, and that's what we enter into with this covenant. Like Ruth, we turn from our homeland of sin and embrace life in the arms of his covenant. As we welcome him into our lives, we are to let his hesed become the foundation of our lives. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us here, really. And what does he ask us in return? What does God ask us in return? Well, it's really interesting. When you look at it carefully, he says he wants us to take his hesed to the world that he loves and to love them too. Now, if you don't know God's hesed, I can tell you from experience that you're missing out. And if you want his hesed in your life, or if you just want to know some more questions, you can come see me, you can come see Hayden or other people. And I'm pretty hard to miss, so you'll see me around. But for those of you who are partakers of the covenant already, I've actually left something out. There's a piece of the covenant which I haven't gone into. And the reason that I've done this is because this is a piece of the covenant. And the reason I'm repeating that this is a piece of the covenant is sometimes we don't think about it in those terms. But each covenant, like I've studied many different covenants in the ancient world, each covenant has this piece, and it is part of the covenant. Right, get to the point, land the plane, he says. It's really important to understand that this table that we see here is part of the covenant. It is an active part of the covenant, and it is commanded of us, it is asked of us by Jesus himself to say, whenever you eat this bread or drink this cup, do it in remembrance of me. Do it to acknowledge that covenant that I made. Do it to acknowledge the hesed that you are to show each other. Bring your hesed to honor his hesed here. This is not a separate ritual. This is part of the covenant that you have entered into. So in your time, if you are a believer in Christ today, if you have entered into that covenant, brothers and sisters of the new covenant, stand, come, partake, and let your hesed bear witness to his. You can come forward now.